And we are recording. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Liking Movies podcast. Today we are one member short. As you can see, no in June today. So Andrew and I thought we would record a little mini episode for you all, anyways. Uh, yeah.
I mean, what are you guys going
Andrew,
to do without this?
yeah,
We
yeah.
were like, no, we made that big announcement, like Andrew's not going to be able to record because of his book tour and stuff, and we were like, and we're just not going to do an episode. Then the fans, like, it was kind of a violent reaction, I'd say, to that announcement. So we're here at your behest, recording a mini-sode for you.
Yep. So, unlike our other ones where we have three questions that we go over, today Andrew and I are just going to talk about one question. And it's a pretty broad question that can take us anywhere in many different ways. And that question is, who is your favorite director? And I'll pass this over to Andrew for him to ramble about.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, no rambling. I'm going to keep it short and sweet. Yeah, as you know. No, that's not true. This question is so interesting. You proposed it. I think I read it this morning. I read the prompt, and I was like, oh, I don't have an answer. Which you would think that for someone who has been making movies for a long time and thinking about movies for a long time, that I would have half of an answer. This is such a basic question, and so and part of the reason for that is that I'm at a crossroads right now, in terms of growing up, or as you get educated in film, there's a heavy influence on directors and auteur theory, which is even auteur theory itself is even more director worshiping than when people call someone an auteur, because when they call someone an auteur, they're just saying that they wrote and directed, and they sort of make a habit of that, and maybe they have a distinct style that you can pick them out. But like auteur theory is like, no matter who wrote it, no matter who's in it, no matter who's doing the music or editing or anything, a movie is almost 100% shaped by its director. So I am very much leaving that school of thought, and I think you actually get a lot more consistency if you look at the writer. That's my new kind of pet theory. In fact, a friend of mine, who I also worked at the Film Center with, but I think you didn't meet him. His name's Brett Wright. We one day we decided we were supposed to be working, and we decided to instead answer the question of whether or not Ridley Scott is a good director, which I know is kind of a dumb question, but we just went down his IMDb page and like just kind of between the two of us, thumbs up or thumbs down every single movie on his IMDb page. And my takeaway from that is, like, a director always brings a certain something to the movie. They have a strength or two or five or 10, and that strength is consistent, but it doesn't always mean that the movie itself is good. So like my takeaway from doing a Ridley Scott examination, informally, of course, was that his casting and acting will always be great, and the movie will always look great. And that's like across the board. You point at any Ridley Scott movie, you can point those two things out. And then some of them will like really heavily engage with like a philosophical theme, and some of them will have a really compelling story or have a really compelling world that they're set in, or any number of different things. But what I kind of concluded is that there's like two things that he always brings to the table. And if he has a great script, then he has a great movie as well. So that's just my kind of sassy take on auteur theory. Is like, what if you went down a writer's IMDb page? What I feel like you'd get more consistency in terms of what you're liking and not liking. Okay, so all that being said, I imagined this question as a, sorry, I lost Jordan. So I'm just gonna wait for a second and see if he comes back.
You hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay. I think I cut out for like a few seconds or something, or like a minute or something.
Okay. Yeah, I figured that was happening, so I actually just stopped talking.
I heard everything you said, though.
Oh, you did? Like,
yeah.
You heard me say that I was going to stop talking. Okay.
Yeah.
That's funny. So I didn't need to. I should have just soldiered on. So anyway, all that to say is, maybe this is a topic for another time, but let's I would love to kind of do an experiment where we go through like a particular writer's IMDb and compare that to like a random director and just kind of measure those two things and see who's more consistent across the board. But I thought of this question in terms of a desert island question, like whose body of work. I'm taking this director's entire catalog to the desert island, and that's my only access to movies. And my answer really shocked me because it would have sickened me when I was in film school. And I even mentioned this last episode, but my answer is Steven Spielberg. My taste in directors is really wide ranging. And like I mentioned last week, my favorite movie is This It's a Wonderful Life, but it would be a stretch to say that Frank Capra is my favorite director, especially like Desert Island director, even though I love some of his other movies. But yeah, pound for pound, I'm taking Jaws and E.T. and Raiders, Lincoln to the desert island with me. And I guess what I was trying to say is, as far as other directors' highs, like for me, maybe Terrence Malick hits like higher highs than Steven Spielberg does, but I would also hate to be stuck on a desert island with only Terrence Malick movies, just by way of example. Though I really adore him. Yeah, there's my answer. How about for you, or do you have follow-up questions for me, or how do you want to do it?
Because last night I've been meaning to watch a Legend forever, and last night I finally watched it, and I was thinking throughout the whole thing, like, wow, I can't believe Ridley Scott directed this, because like you said, it was gorgeous visuals, very striking. I watched the director's cut, so I'm probably watching the theatrical version later, but the director's cut had a lot of kind of examinations on good and evil and that kind of thing. But like, because I'm really familiar with like his more, it seemed like such a kids movie, because I think it's PG.
And I'm so sorry because you cut out for a second. What movie are we talking about right now?
Oh, Legend, with Tom Cruise and Mia Sara, and who else is it? Tim Curry. He plays the Prince of Darkness.
That like barely rings a bell. You have to. Is this pretty early Ridley Scott?
This is like his third. It was 1985. I think it was his third or fourth movie. But you go from Alien, which is like super dark, super adult. I can't remember what his other movies are in between then, but then you go to essentially a children's fantasy movie with,
Interesting.
and it's, I guess it felt weird to have this movie directed by Ridley Scott where everybody in the beginning is like really cheery and happy, and it's kind of like a Disney movie almost for the first maybe 30 minutes or so, which I thought was kind of cool to see, like him do like kind of a kids movie. So I just thought it was funny you mentioned that, but yeah, I was definitely, the visuals popped out to me in that. I was like,
okay,
what, this is like a really amazingly shot kids movie essentially, and it's great, and I liked it.
like the best looking Disney Channel movie.
Yeah, but it wasn't like, I wouldn't.
It was better.
Yeah, it was better than that, but it's it would be an interesting experiment to have other directors who mostly direct things for adult audiences direct a movie for kids. Or it also, I mean, you could also say that Legend, I felt like you could also make the argument that he just made the movie he wanted to make, and it just happened to be, because he was kind of riffing off of Grimm fairy tales and old mythology and stuff, it just happened to be rated PG because he wasn't intentionally childish or anything, but yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, but he's definitely, I think there's, going to your auteur theory, I think that's I think I agree with you to an extent. I think that's definitely true for lots of big Hollywood movies.
And I will say I have an addendum to add to that, and you might be walking right up to it. I forgot to, if the director consistently writes and directs their own work, then we see like a lot more consistency across their work. But if they, like Steven Spielberg and Ridley Scott, if they move from screenwriter to screenwriter, depending on the project and stuff, then I think we see a lot more fluctuations. Okay.
Oh yeah, and that was what I was gonna add too. Yeah, I think when it comes, I think there's two exceptions really. Is one is, if they're writer directors most of the time, and I think the other one would have to be, I guess, the way they produce their movies to an extent, because if I think about someone like I'm thinking about like more underground independent artists like Maya Deren, for example, or let me think here, Alejandro Jodorowsky. I'm not sure if I don't think they always wrote their stuff. I'd have to double check. But I think but they're working in a very underground independent space where it's not the typical, studio hires a writer, they then hire a director, or a director comes to the studio with the project, and then the studio's like, okay, we'll invest in this, but we're going to have a say in the creative, boundaries of everything.
Right.
I think when things are made outside of the Hollywood system, I think that's when you get more of auteur theory. I think we mentioned this last week or maybe the week before. Star Wars, the franchise, aside from the first one, is essentially the biggest, most successful independent movie series ever made, because George Lucas made a buttload of money on the first one, and then he pretty much made his own studio, his own company, and from there on out, that was pretty much all him for the most part. With with the original trilogy, with Empire and Episode 6, there were other creative voices involved, but at the end of the day, he still had the final say on all those movies. The prequels were undeniably all him. And I think
so ironic compared to where 1/3 of the movies were, to have those 6 movies be true indie movies in the definition of the term, and then to have some of the most producer present movies ever made. That's fascinating. Yeah, great.
And so I think it's I think it's the farther you are removed from Hollywood, I think then the auteur theory becomes greater because the people creating because they don't really have to answer to any. And so I think I think a lot of the work that I really respond to and the work that I like, I would consider them auteurs in a sense because because of the creative control they had over the projects. I don't think there's a movie necessarily that was made by committee that I would really like fall in love with necessarily. All of my favorite directors or kind of movies, I feel like you can feel the presence of the director. Take someone like Robert Eggers, who did The Witch and the Lighthouse. Those are movies where you kind of feel, I mean, of course, over the course of his work so far, which is small, you really get a sense of what he's interested in and what he's really into. And again, he is a writer and director, but he was working in an independent space where it seemed like the producers trusted him to do whatever he wanted. And I think in those rare cases where directors are allowed to just kind of use their voice and tell things the way they want to be told, I think in those cases that the auteur theory applies. But again, it's difficult in the Hollywood system when, it's kind of hard to tell all the time who's responsible for what, who's answering to, this or that. But
can I jump in with something?
Go for it.
Okay. I guess I would just say, just to clarify, I think that I specifically am attacking the true auteur theory, like coming out of France, which would, that's like focused on Hitchcock, among other folks, as like, it does not matter who wrote it, it is the director, as opposed to the way we use auteur now when we mean writer director, essentially. Which I think, I mean, like, I'd be shocked if Maya Deren did not, I'd be kind of surprised if she had a screenplay, but whatever her master document she was going off of, I'd be pretty shocked if that wasn't her that like authored that, if you know what I mean. Like, I think, yeah. So anyway, I would, just to distinguish between those two auteur theories, it's I'm attacking the director above all without regard to who wrote it versus like Wes Anderson, Paul Thomas Anderson, that crowd, because obviously their work is extremely consistent, and if you like one or two of their movies, you most likely like all of their movies.
And I think in that kind of instance, I think I feel like it is possible to an extent I think there has to be some cases because Stanley Kubrick didn't write all his stuff. But you can undeniably feel his presence on each of his movies, at least after a certain point in his career, like 1950s onwards or something like that. I think, and again, he's a rare example, but I think, when you're watching a Stanley Kubrick movie, the way he shoots things, the way things are paced, the sound effects he uses, the music he uses, the cinematography, you feel his voice and presence, even though he didn't write all his stuff. So I think it is possible, but I think I agree with you. It's a very rare thing to have that, to have an exception to that, to have that auteur theory actually be applicable to a wide variety of directors. Yeah.
Something to dive into later on.
Yeah.
I'm curious if Hitchcock and Kubrick are the exceptions that prove the rule, or if they carry the rule. Should be interesting.
Yeah.
To think about that's the next couple of weeks.
That is a good question. I'm I'm trying to think of someone else. Like Sam Raimi has a pretty distinct style. I wonder if he writes his own stuff too. Now I'm just thinking of directors that like I can tell when I'm watching their movies, but I don't know if they wrote them. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. Food for thought.
I think like you, when I was trying to come up with an answer for this, I didn't really have one exact answer either. It was mostly because, I think of like, what's my favorite movie? And for me, that'd be The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But I wouldn't necessarily consider Sergio Leone my favorite. But at the same time, I like all of his movies a whole lot. So like in the terms of body of work, he would also be up there. But then more experimental directors like, Jodorowsky or like Maya Deren or like Lynn Ramsey, even though she does pretty like, that's not exactly artsy, but like kind of more indie kind of art house movies. I really, really love and respond to their work. But it's tricky because it's like, how do you tell who's your favorite director? And I don't have an answer. I asked this question.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I don't have an answer.
Desert Island it then. Whose body of work are you taking? So like, it's probably not Robert Eggers, because then you get two movies, just by way of example. Who are you taking to that Desert Island?
Man, that's a tough question because then it's like asking your like, what are your kind of, it's almost at that point, it's not even about the director necessarily, but it's about their movies.
Yeah. I'll tell you my runner-up while you're thinking. I'll just tell you my runner-up. This is just so weird for me because like I've talked about like probably when I was 17 I would have been like Orson Welles, even though I'd seen one Orson Welles movie. It's just like, you could have just handed me a list of like, so I'd be like, oh, either Orson Welles or Alfred Hitchcock, it's just like just a robot, not a person thinking. But this, I'm really interested to see how Soul ends up because it actually, Pete Docter might be I said pound for pound with Steven Spielberg, but I misused that expression because actually pound for pound with Pete Docter, I'm just like really in love with his work and the heights that he takes me to. So if Soul is as good, if he continues on the trajectory he's going on, then he'd be a strong candidate for me as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, the Desert Island would have to be. I would probably pick Peter Jackson because he's the reason I want to be a movie maker, and I can watch Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I can watch those movies over and over, but he also has lots of great early splatter movies that really, like, I find really appealing, like Brain Dead or Dead Alive. I can't remember the actual title, or like Meet the Feebles and stuff. So I feel like with him you get a nice variety, and like of those kind of two varieties, I really like both of those. There's the early splatter Peter Jackson, which is kind of different from Lord of the Rings Peter Jackson, which I really like, because I think so if I pick him, I think I'd get a more bang for my buck, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Because if I pick any other director, like any of the directors I really like, it's like, okay, now you're stuck watching art house movies forever. Oh, now you're watching, this kind of movie forever. And I don't know if I could ever watch like one type of movie forever. But with him, he makes movies that I could watch forever, but he's also made vastly different movies. Whereas like I could say Kubrick if I wanted a different genre, but I don't necessarily want every single comedy to be a Stanley Kubrick comedy or a Stanley Kubrick horror movie to be a, the kind of horror I'm watching always, even though I love like all his movies and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let me just spin the question one other way then. Which director do you think shows up the most in your top 20 favorite movies? And I know you actually have a top 20.
I do. I have it pulled. Let's see.
Written down. While you pull it up,
Okay.
I'll do a little song and dance for our audience, unless you just have it up already. Which
I have to do some math here.
Okay, you have the document up. That's great. Oh, I have to. I am trying to think who. At one point, I definitely would have said Joss Whedon as well, and probably at another time I would have said John Lasseter too. And both those guys haven't aged very well. But even regardless of that, of their failings in their personal lives, they're like Joss Whedon. I like his writing, just like his dialogue and stuff. Like my college self just like set my soul on fire. That's just like what I was looking for. But not as much right this second. It's feeling a little one note to me. We'll see what happens with the Nevers. All right. Do you have an answer?
Yeah. So I think it'd be Sergio Leone.
Oh, really?
Because it's his Dollars trilogy, and then Once Upon a Time in the West, and then Peter Jackson would be the runner-up because, you know, if you include Lord of the Rings as, you know, one entry, that's 3 movies right there. So.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, great. Well, what do you want to do with the last 4 minutes of our conversation?
We can just do some ASMR, right?
Yes, that is what I was hoping you would say. Actually, if you have a follow-up thought, I'm going to look at my top 10 movie list and see if there's a director that shows up twice.
Okay. I think I'll pose this question, which I'll answer, and then you can kind of go to your answer to your question while you're looking at that. So like I said, I watched Legend last night, and I was like, oh man, this is Ridley Scott. So what are some other movies that were directed by directors that it feels weird that they directed it? So like for me, again, it was like I watched Legend and I thought, wow, that's weird that Ridley Scott directed this. Or Peter Jackson again. If you look at his other body of work, you know, before Lord of the Rings, it's kind of weird that he did Lord of the Rings because it's the movies he was making before that were so vastly different. And funny enough, I think if you watch the Hobbit movies, tonally wise, I think the Hobbit movies feel much more similar to his early work than the Lord of the Rings movies feel to his overall body of work. So do you have any like ideas or like what are some directors that, you know, made movies that it's weird that they directed?
Well, I've been doing some research into Fury Road recently, so it was funny to read about Happy Feet and Fury Road in the same article. So I'd say George Miller. He did Babe too, right?
Yeah, Babe.
I love that. I mean, Babe is so good, and I'm actually looking at my list of favorite movies right now and realize I need to add Babe. And I don't know if there's any human in the world that could have made Babe and Fury Road. So
yeah.
And I feel like this isn't quite along the same lines, but Guillermo del Toro. You were talking about Peter Jackson. If you're bringing someone over for variety, kind of, I think del Toro would also be a good, for me, a good backup there to just like he's just hops around to so many different genres and that kind of thing. And every del Toro movie feels like a del Toro movie, so it doesn't answer the question you just asked, but yeah.
Did you find the director who appeared most on your list?
You know, I'm realizing that my list is sort of sorted in such a way that I sort of like I put Inside Out on the list, but I love Up as well, and I kind of like I put Inside Out in place of like almost as a tie for both of them. Every movie on the list represents several other movies. Like Empire Strikes Back is on there, and to me, it's a very similar movie to Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I just had to choose the one that's a Star Wars one.
Yeah.
So I probably need to, because it's probably true that Empire Strikes Back and Raiders of the Lost Ark both belong in that list. And like I have WALL-E, but if WALL-E didn't exist, Finding Nemo would certainly be like up there. So I kind of do this unfair thing where it's like if I have one by that director, then or of a similar style, then I weed out the other one. But yeah, it's actually, if I'm looking at the list itself and being really technical, the only directors that show up twice are John Lasseter and Lord and Miller. I know that they aren't both credited as, I think, I'm really confused about the credits to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, but I'm not sure any of them are credited as directors on that movie. And maybe one of them's credited as a screenwriter. There's like 3 directors credited and like 4 screenwriters credited. But I know they're in the credits there somewhere. And also for 22 Jump Street, which is one of my favorite movies. And then I have the Toy Story quadrilogy on here, which John Lasseter shows up on twice. And sometime within June, we need to do Pixar at some point, but like I would really love to do like just a John Lasseter. The most fascinating conversation I've ever had with In June is just about John Lasseter, or sort of like really, really behind the scenes at Pixar. And that there's a lot there that I think is like really interesting and would be really interesting to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it looks like our time is up. So I think we'll say goodbye to our audience. Thank you for tuning in for this super short episode. And we will be back next week, hopefully, with the 3 of us in a normally long episode.
Great. Jordan, thank you so much. This was so fun.
Yeah, thank you.